First up, to the exotic pest eradication program that's stirring up a hornet's nest of controversy among beekeepers. A majority of state and territory governments last year decided it was impossible to wipe out the aggressive and potentially destructive Asian honeybee, which has established a foothold in far north Queensland. This shocked honey producers and parts of the horticultural industry that rely on managed beehives for pollination. And they've taken their campaign for a review of that decision all the way to Canberra, as Peter McCutcheon reports.
On the scent of an exotic pest. A trained Labrador is trying to find the destructive and invasive Asian honeybee.
Yes!
The dog is rewarded for a successful reconnaissance. While biosecurity officers bring in the heavy artillery.
Asian honeybees are a very invasive species. Not only do they spread gradually from an area once the area has become infested, but when they're in invasive mode, operationally we've seen swarms jump up to 7 kilometres away from a hive.
The pest insect has built a hive in a small hole in a branch of this mango tree. After bombarding the hive with half a dozen cans of insecticide, the enemy is destroyed and the remains are examined and stored for research.
Have a look at this drone. There's a fair bit of drone there, and there's a bit of worker stuff, but there's a fair bit of drone stuff popping up.
This program is now in limbo because a majority of Australian governments believe the war is unwinnable.
Just have a bit of a look on the other.
As to eradication, the decision was made that was not possible. After 357 hives have been destroyed, many months of work put in, and the biology of the bee, which is that it swarms every few weeks as each hive grows to a certain size, and within 2 to 3 weeks it splits and swarms.
But affected industries are accusing authorities of being too keen to fly the white flag.
I think it's certainly premature at the best. We were finding them early and we felt that we were sort of turning the corner. But now, unfortunately, they don't want to continue the program.
This is where the problem began. 4 years ago, a ship arrived in Cairns with a colony of Apis cerana, or Asian honeybees, in its mast. Landline at the time spoke to the man who made the discovery, North Queensland beekeeper Maurie Damon.
They borrowed a container from the shipping people and caught some of the bees that were flying, took them down to Jack Shields at DPI, who then had them investigated. I called back later in the day, and he gave me the bad news that it was suspected that they might have been Apis cerana, and we have had bad news since then.
We could expect the bee to move, I'd say, throughout most of Australia, actually.
Dr. Denis Anderson has been closely studying the Asian honeybee for more than 20 years. He explains that, contrary to its name, this particular subspecies is a poor honey producer and robs other hives. In other words, it's a useless and destructive pest.
It moves anywhere up to 100 kilometres per year off its own back. That is, by swarming and just moving forward. And it seems to be in this invasive mode, so it's swarming quite regularly and just moving forward all the time.
European beekeepers are horrified at the prospect of a widespread outbreak of the Asian honeybee. Managed hives like this one, belonging to queen bee breeder Trevor Weatherhead, are part of an $80 million industry that is vulnerable to the exotic pest.
For the honey industry, the Asian bee will outcompete our managed European bee and also will rob nests out. To give you an example, in the Solomon Islands, where it turned up in 2000, they had around 2,000 managed honeybee colonies, and now they have none.
This food station, set up by biosecurity officers in Cairns, shows the European and smaller Asian bees in direct competition. But the European bee faces more than a fight over food. It's also vulnerable to a damaging group of mites, the varroa mites, that are carried by its Asian cousin.
We've been fortunate in the ones that turned up in cans don't have mites on them, but if some came in with mites on them, then they just reproduce there and eventually would come across to ours. If it gets into our European bees, it will take out all the feral European bees that are here, and a lot of pollination that's carried out is done through feral bees, so they would disappear and they wouldn't be there to carry out that pollination. Managed hives, you can keep them with a lot of work, so what would happen is the price of pollination would certainly go up. To give you an example, there's another one, the varroa destructor mite, which is the one that's in the United States. When it turned up in New Zealand in 2000, the price for hives for pollinating kiwi fruit doubled. So you can imagine the effect on the horticultural agricultural industries if they've got to pay double the price for hives for paid pollination.
And that's why parts of the horticultural industry are worried.
At the moment, the incursion's only small, and I think that can be attributed to the successful eradication program that has been in place, and that's why we have serious concerns about removing this eradication program. This bee's been described as a cane toad with wings, and that's why we've got to really think about, do we want to just let this spread, or do we want to try and do something about this before it gets any further?
Let's see what this one's got today.
National funding for the eradication program was pulled last November, although Queensland continues to fund some positions. Most state governments believed eradication was futile.
It wasn't a unanimous decision, and in fact Queensland, Tasmania and the Northern Territory had views that additional work would be beneficial, but the weight of opinion was that additional work would not change the facts.
Landline can reveal that one independent consultant's report, considered by state and federal governments, found that although eradication is not certain, it still appears feasible. And that's a view shared by Biosecurity Queensland officers in the field.
Operationally, we still think we're within a window of eradication. It's by no means certain, but from what we see on the ground and how, we know that once we detect infestation, we can kill it.
But Landline understands a dissenting view was put by the Victorian Department of Primary Industries.
The view of the collective of the states by majority was that it was no longer eradicable, and in that context the decision was made that we would cease the formal cost sharing arrangements for eradication. That does not mean that further work is not going to be done.
The details of this further work are still being determined, and officially the program has moved from eradication to containment. Trevor Weatherhead has trouble understanding what that means.
If you're not out there destroying colonies in an eradication program, then what are you going to do to contain it? Because you can't, like cattle, you can keep them in a paddock and put a fence around them. Bees, they fly.
Honey producers travelled to Parliament House in Canberra as part of a campaign to bring back the eradication program. And the matter was put back on the political agenda during a Senate committee hearing last week, with Biosecurity Australia leaving the door open for a change of heart.
Is it possible for the matter to be reconsidered?
If there is sufficient evidence that comes forward and it's supported to be reconsidered, of course, Senator.
Are you saying, Senator, you would like the CCEPP to reconvene to consider whether its view that it put forward before should be reviewed?
This is the consultative
committee
that does the technical
analysis of whether or not its opinion is that it can be. If that's what you're asking, we could seek to call that together and ask them to either reaffirm or review their position.
So that's something that can be done. Can that be done fairly quickly?
It could.
A scene played out on the streets of Cairns illustrates the extent to which the exotic bee could become a pest in urban environments. Apis cerana have built a hive in the smallest of hollows at the top of a power pole.
A member of the public reported a suspect Asian honeybee We confirmed it through our diagnostic process, and now we're working with Ergon Energy to destroy that colony.
So what are they actually doing?
What they will do is they will cut off the top of the power pole, and then we will confirm that we have destroyed all of the infestation, and then our scientists will have a look at it and determine how many queens, how many swarms have gone from that particular hive, and then we know what other work we need to do in this particular area.
Because this bee only requires a very small cavity, we can expect it to be, quite a pest around the cities and towns.
Hundreds of these hives have been destroyed in the Cairns area over the past 2 years.
That's it. Nice one. You got it back?
The bees have been found some 50 kilometres away. And opinion remains divided over whether authorities gave up too soon on total extermination.
Expansion will occur. That's essentially what the decision was based on, that it is not eradicable, but we will do the best we can to protect Australia from any impacts of this animal.
I have difficulty in saying how they're going to contain it. No one has been able to explain to me what they're going to do to contain it, because I don't believe it's in the realms of possibility.